We're going to be picking up this afternoon exactly where we left off on Friday, talking about sine, cosine, tangent, and their buddies in the second quadrant, in the third quadrant, in the fourth quadrant. So if you remember on Friday when we left off, we used a point to be able to find our sine, our cosine, and our tangent when it was in a quadrant other than quadrant 1. Now, this method obviously would work for any quadrant, but we were specifically focusing on the ones that we hadn't worked with yet, which are quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. Now, what we're going to start with today is looking at some very special angles. There are 4 special angles on our coordinate plane. We call those the quadrantal angles, okay? The quadrantal angles are an angle whose terminal side, whose ending side lands on an axis. The ending side of our angle ends up on an axis. So we really have 4 different scenarios. We know that in all cases, my initial side starts right here on the positive x-axis. Any angle that I'm making, my initial side starts out at the positive x-axis. Now, if we continue to work, we should see that there are really 4 really special angles. My first angle is what happens if my angle is actually 0 degrees. Okay? 0 degrees. My initial side never moves. My initial side and my terminal side end up to be exactly the same. Now, 0 is really the same also as what? 360. If I went one full spin around the circle, I would get back to that same spot. So 0 degrees and 360 degrees take me to exactly the same spot looking like this. Now, my next special angle is what happens if I'm on the positive y-axis here. So what happens if my angle is 90 degrees? Third scenario, I'm on the negative x-axis. What happens if that angle is 180 degrees? And last but not least, if I go from here all the way around to here, my angle would be 270 degrees. Okay, so 90 means I open up to 90 degrees this way. 180 means I open up to 180 degrees that direction. And 270, I start at 0 and I go 90, I go 180, and then I go all the way around to 270 degrees. Now, hopefully, we remember sine is x over r. Excuse me, I said that wrong. Cosine is x over r, sine is y over r, and tangent is y over x. Absolutely. Now, hopefully we remember those things. Now, what's interesting with our quadrantal angle? What is interesting with our quadrantal angle, when I pick a point on this side of my terminal side, it's going to lie here. With 90 degrees, I would pick a point on my terminal side. It may lie here. I'm going to pick a point here. It may lie here. And I'm going to pick a point on this terminal side. It may lie here. Now, remember that this point I picked helped me set the radius of the circle that I could build through that point, correct? Yes, no, maybe? Remember that the point I picked, remember we said, if I bring this back down, through this point I could build a circle, so that's why I called this R, this 5, the radius of that circle that I could draw with that point. Yes or no? Does that bring back memories? Okay, now we're going to use that same idea here. Now, if this is the radius of my circle, this is R. Well, where am I at this point then? Where is that point if my radius in this situation is R? Okay, what is my x though? R. Isn't it true that I went to the right R to get to this point? So this point is at R0, right? Now, knowing that, how do I get to this point if I go up the radius of this circle, if I go up a distance of R? 0R. All right. Here, my radius of my circle is right here. Well, if I go to the left R, where am I at? Negative R0. And here, my radius of my circle is this. If I go down R, where am I at for that point? 0, negative R. Got to be able to draw that picture. Okay, now keeping in mind, if here I'm at R0, my X is what? The R, and my Y is 0. Okay, with this point, my X is 0 and my Y is R. Okay, with this point, my X is the opposite of R and my Y is 0. And at 270 degrees, my X is 0 and my Y is negative R. Okay, because we know that we use that X and that Y. Okay, so now what are we going to use it for? I've drawn these beautiful pictures, but what am I going to use them for? Well, I want to evaluate the sine, the cosine, and the tangent when theta is 180 degrees. Okay. So let's say we hadn't drawn these scenarios, okay? The first thing I'm going to do, okay, I want the sine, the cosine, and the tangent of 180 degrees. I need to think to myself, 180 degrees is a special angle. Okay, so I'm going to draw myself a sketch. All right, I know that I start at the positive x-axis. There's my initial side. And I go around 180 degrees. So I go 90 and I go 180, which takes me over to here. All right, when I'm at 180 degrees, I pick a point on that terminal side. Now, remember that from 0, 0 out to that point is the radius of my circle. From 0, 0 to that point is the radius of my circle. Where is that point? Negative R0. That point is at negative R0. Okay, then I need to remind myself. The X is negative R, and the Y is 0. Okay, now we're going to go into what we have learned about sine, cosine, and tangent last week. Okay, so the sine of my angle theta, well, how much is theta? 180. So the sine of 180 I'm trying to find, the cosine of 180 I'm trying to find, and the tangent of 180 I'm trying to find. Okay, now last week, how did we find sine? Opposite over hypotenuse, but what was the other way that we found sine? Y over R. When we are drawing our triangles, the sine was Y over R. How did we find the cosine? X over R. And how did we find the tangent? Y over X. Very nice. Okay, now, sine of 180 is Y over R. Well, what number did I have for Y? 0. Well, what's 0 divided by R? 0 divided by anything is 0. All right. Then my cosine at 180 is X over R. Okay, what do I have for X? My X is negative R divided by R. Well, what's negative R divided by R? Negative 1. All right, and last but not least, we got tangent of 180. Okay, so what's my Y value? 0 over what's my X value? Negative R. Well, what's 0 divided by negative R? 0. So there's my sine, my cosine, and my tangent of 180 degrees. Questions with that? Okay. Should we do another one like that? All right, let's do one more on the back side here. Okay, so we got the sine, the cosine, and the tangent at 270 degrees. Okay, so we're going to draw ourselves a picture. Draw myself a picture. I'm going to draw this angle. So I know that I start at the positive x-axis. and 270 degrees. I go 90, I go 180, I go all the way around to 270. And then I see right away, oh, this is a special one because it's on one of the axes. My terminal side is on one of the axes, so I know that this is a special one. This is a very special one. So I pick a point on that terminal side. Now, if from 0, 0 to that point is the radius of that circle, if from 0, 0 to that point is the radius of the circle, where is this point? How do I get to that point? 0, negative r. I go down r, so that point is 0, negative r. Okay, so when I'm looking at that point, my x is 0 and my y is negative r. Okay, now why do I write that down? Because I want to know the sine of my angle 270. I want to know the cosine of my angle 270. And I want to know the tangent of my angle 270. All right. Alex, how do I find the sine? Take a look back. Sine is y over r. Very nice. Sine's y over r. Now, Alex, what do I have for y? Negative r. And what's negative r divided by r? Negative 1. Good. Cosine at 270. All right, Tyler, how do I find cosine? X over r. Okay, so what do I have for my x in this point? 0 divided by r. What's 0 divided by r? Looking good. All right, tangent at 270. Kendall, how do I find tangent? Y over x. Okay, so what do we have for our y? Negative r over what do I have for my x? Okay, so what's negative r divided by 0? Undefined. Whenever we divide by 0, the result is undefined. The result is undefined. Okay, now, the signs of the trigonometric functions. Okay, we know now if we put our point in the second quadrant, third quadrant, fourth quadrant, I can find the sine, cosine, tangent, and their buddies in those quadrants. But there's a shortcut way to remember if they're going to be positive or negative, okay? And that shortcut way is to use something called cast. Going to use something called cast. Starts down there in quadrant 4, C-A-S-T, okay? Cast tells us which ones are positive. Cast tells us which ones are positive. Cast tells which trig functions are positive. All right, now let's start out with the easy quadrant. The A. The A. The A stands for all. Okay, up here in quadrant 1, the A stands for all. All right, they're all positive, all 6 of them. Sine is positive, cosine is positive, tangent is positive. All right, Hunter, who's buddies with sine? Who's buddies with sine?
Has to have a co in it.
Yep. Who's buddies with sine, folks? Cosecant. So cosecant's going to be positive. Who's buddies with cosine? Secant is going to be positive. And who's buddies with tangent? Cotangent is going to be positive as well. All of them, if I have an angle in quadrant 1, all of them are positive. All right, let's go down here to C. C reminds me cosine. The C down here in quadrant 4 reminds me of cosine. The cosine is going to be positive, okay? Well, they always take their buddies along. So if cosine is positive, who's his buddy? Secant is going to be positive also. They always take their buddy along. If cosine is positive, secant is positive also.
So married.
They're kind of like married, absolutely. Yep, they're buddies. They're reciprocals. So if cosine is positive, then secant's positive. That C down there in quadrant 4 reminds me of cosine. Now, that means that the other 4 are negative. So sine is negative, tangent is negative, sine's buddy cosecant is negative, and tangent's buddy cotangent is going to be negative also.
So cosine, secant, the only ones that's positive.
Cosine and secant are the only ones that are positive down here in quadrant 4. All right, up here in quadrant 2. Quadrant 2, S reminds us of sine, absolutely. The S should remind us of sine, which means that sine in quadrant 2 is going to be positive. Who's his buddy? Cosecant is going to be positive also. The other 4 are negative. Cosine is negative, tangent is negative. Who's buddies with cosine? Secant is negative, and tangent's buddy, cotangent, is negative. All right, what about down here in quadrant 3? What is that T trying to tell us down there in quadrant 3? Tangent. All right, T's reminding me of tangent. So I automatically know that tangent is positive. What else is going to be positive? Cotangent's going to be positive. All right, the other 4 are definitely negative. So sine is negative. His buddy cosecant's going to be negative. Cosine is negative. His buddy secant's going to be negative. Cast, a shortcut way to know if they're positive or if they're negative. All right, so looking at A in example 5. Example 5 says state the quadrant the angle's in, and then tell the sine, the cosine, and the tangents if they're positive or they're negative. Okay. 195 degrees. Where does that put me? My positive x-axis is going to be my initial side. Where am I at if I'm at 195 degrees? Yep, I'm going to go 90. I'm going to go 180, and then I'm going to go another 15 down here to quadrant 3. Okay, now, in quadrant 3, I'm in quadrant 3. I look up here at cast. I look down there in quadrant 3. What does that T remind me of? What does T remind me of? Tangent. Okay, so tangent is going to be positive. Okay, now they asked me for the other 2. What about sine? Negative. Tangent is the only one that's positive and is buddy. What about cosine? Cosine's going to be negative also. All right, let's do B, and if we're okay with that, we're good for today. All right, 351 degrees. I'm going to draw myself a little sketch. Where does 351 degrees put me? Quadrant 4. All right, positive x-axis, and I go 90, I go 180, I go 270, and then I go a bunch more to get 351 degrees. Now, when I look back up at cast, down in quadrant 4, I see a C. What does that C remind me of down here in quadrant 4? It talks about cosine. That C reminds me of cosine. And that C with cosine will be what? Positive. Okay? Now, what about sine? What about sine down here in quadrant 4? It's negative. And what about tangent down here in quadrant 4? It's negative also.
What if the angle is-
What?
What if the angle is 0 or 360?
Then you have to do what we did to find out what it actually is to determine if it's going to be positive and negative. Okay? Yep, that's a great question. If it's 90 or 180 or 270, then I have to go back and I have to make my picture to actually find out what it is to know if it's going to be negative or positive when it's on the axis.
That's a special one.
Yep, very special. Any questions with that? All right, set that aside.